Testing. Testing. Perfect.
I am Willard Wyler, master of the macabre. For over 40 years, I directed the most terrifying, visceral, and bloody scenes ever committed to film. My contribution is nothing short of genius. Before my retirement,
Hello, Chris.
people demanded
Hello,
to
Daniel.
know my secret.
It's a pleasure to have you in here today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I've been looking forward to doing this podcast for a long time.
I've been training it.
If you really want to know how
We got a lot of stuff to cover today. I've had Ben in here, Ben Kirkwick, from Uncharted X, a couple times now, and he's talked a lot about some of the stuff that you've been working on for the past few decades. He and I are both huge fans of your work. He obviously, cites all of your work when he does his stuff and when he goes to the pyramids and reports some of the stuff in his videos on Uncharted X. And that's how I actually first discovered you, was from when Ben came on here about a year ago. After he came in, I read your book, The Giza Power Plant, twice. Just finished reading your new book, The Tesla Connection, which was mind-bending to say the least. Maybe you could give us sort of a brief background on your history and how you got interested in the pyramids of ancient Egypt.
I was raised in a working class family in Manchester, England. And my father was a butcher and my mother was a housewife. And I have 4 siblings, a brother and 3 sisters. So it was a very loving household. And I ultimately decided at the age of 15 that I was done with school. And I played out to take an apprenticeship and was hired by a company called Mather and Platts. They were an engineering company in Manchester. And so at the age of 15, I entered the apprenticeship program, worked there as an apprentice for 6 years. I started out, as I recall, my paycheck was like $7 a week for 40 hours.
Oh, God.
So, apprentices were not paid much back then. I mean, if you go back to, the really old days, like Victorian times, apprentices, parents, fathers would take their sons to apprentice with a tradesman, a craftsman.
Mm-hmm.
And they would pay them to take them and teach them the trade, or they would work for nothing, but they would kind of stay with the tradesmen and craftsmen and serve their apprenticeship away from home.
Right.
So anyway, this was kind of like an indentured apprentice. I have my documents, indentures that I was given when I completed my apprenticeship, and then I left the company as a journeyman, specializing in lathes. So,
In lathes.
lathes.
What is a lathe?
Lathe turning.
What is that?
It's a machine tool that is used for machining parts, round parts particularly, very precise round parts. There's all kinds of lathes. There are vertical lathes, horizontal lathes, and they've developed over the years. There are capstan lathes, turret lathes, tool room lathes. You know, every one of them has different features. So so that was my specialty at the time, and I took that with me and went to work elsewhere when I was 22. Worked at a forge for a bit, and then I went to work at a company called Hunter Musgrave, and they made a paper milling machine, textile milling machinery, really long shafts and rollers and stuff like that for industry. While I was there, I saw an ad in the Manchester Evening News, and it was an aerospace company in the States that were recruiting machinists to work in the aerospace industry.
Okay.
Right. So
What year was this?
that would have been around 1968.
Okay.
So in 1968, I applied for the position, and I got a telegram saying that I'd been selected, and I had to get a visa to come to the States and start working. So I finally left the shores of my home country in 1969 and landed in New York on May the 9th, 1969.
Okay, so you came to the U.S. in around 68 to work for the aerospace company.
Yeah.
And what exactly were you doing for those guys?
Well, they hired me to run a vertical lathe they call them bullards.
Bullard.
Bullard. B-U-L-L-A-R-D.
Okay.
Well, you've got millions of machinists around the States who will recognize that word.
Okay. What does a bullard look like?
It's a vertical lathe. It's like they've got a round chuck, and then you've got the typical axes that move a turret so that you can cut inside and outside diameters.
Oh, is this a bullard? Okay,
so-
that's an intense looking machine. Wow.
Yeah, before, when I was in England, I ran a Webster and Bennett. So in England, they call them borers, vertical borers.
Oh, okay. And what?
In the States, they call it vertical lathe.
So can you explain to me what this thing is doing here?
Well, right now it's just sitting there. There's no part. But if you see that there's a chuck there.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mount a part to be machined on the chuck, and that hexagon kind of thing that has it's not a hexagon, but it has a tool post, and you mount tools in the tool post and cut the parts on the outside and inside, different shapes.
What kind of materials?
Well, in aerospace, you're talking about exotic alloys like Inconel, Astaloy X.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Heat-resistant, corrosion-resistant alloys. When I first came to the States, I worked for a place in Martinsville, Indiana called Twig Industries. And Twig Industries, they were a subcontractor for some of the major EOMs like General Electric, Allison Engine, which is now Rolls-Royce in Indianapolis, Pratt & Whitney, and other aerospace companies. So they did a lot of aerospace stuff, including stuff for the moon landing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What kind of stuff did you guys engineer for the moon landing?
Well, they were a manufacturer. They didn't necessarily design it or engineer it. They engineered the processes.
Okay.
It was a framework for the survival pack for the astronauts when they landed on the moon and did their moonwalk. The box of air that they had on their back.
That box on their back, you guys made that.
The framework for it.
And
So it was a Weldon.
What is that box on the back? What does it do?
It's their survival. I guess it provides heat and cooling. Their suits keeps the temperature regulated and monitors their physical functions and that stuff.
Okay.
But
Wow, that's fascinating.
obviously they had made that before I got there, because the moon landing was in June, right? The month after I arrived.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was
Good timing.
It was interesting. There's a thing about manufacturers and the inside jokes and the way people talk about the company and stuff like that, right? So it's like there was one old wag said something. He said, "Well, we know that the astronauts are going to come back. They'll make it back because everything Twig makes always comes back eventually." So in other words, it's kind of like everything they make has got flaws, so it's going to come back.
Oh, God. Well, at least you got a sense of humor.
Well, I think you got to have a sense of humor.
Right, of course. Yeah. So how long did you work for this company?
And I worked there for about a year, just under a year.
Oh, okay.
In Martinsville, yeah.
Okay. And what did you do after that?
Then I went briefly to Texas, and then I worked at a very small shop in Indianapolis. I came back to Indiana, which is a very small shop. They made drapery, machinery, and wheel balancing equipment.
Wheel balancing equipment.
Yeah. So it was 1970. So we were kind of heading into a recession at that time, and so it was very difficult to find work. So I just got the best job that I could get at the time. And then after that, I went to a place called Beulah, which is known as Indiana Gear Company. They made gears for helicopters and other aerospace kind of products. So
Okay. So what is the process when you're working for these companies that are making these gears or any of these aerospace pieces or parts? Like what is the process to actually creating them? Like you're operating this big machinery. So do people send you plans or like schematics for how this needs to be done and what materials need to be done with? And then you guys sort of figure out how the cuts are going to be made and all that. How does that process work?
yeah, generally the manufacturing process that I have experienced, and every company is different, of course. But what I've experienced is that the company will receive an order from a customer that will include drawings and specifications. Some of the specifications are on the drawing, others are in a separate sheet, but they will control the process. So the engineers will then take those drawings and design a process and create their own drawings, breaking out all the various elements of the drawing. So if the drawing has multiple parts, assemblies, sub-assemblies associated with like a jet engine, I scroll through here and put up. So essentially you've got various parts to a jet engine, and they're comprised of individual single parts. Those single parts could be made of sheet metal. They could be forgings, castings, and they are basically cut, welded, machined, formed in all different kinds of configurations, and then put together. They may be brazed, welded together, which would include maybe spot welding or TIG welding. And then those sub-assemblies are then shipped to the customer, and the customer installs them in their engine. Interesting. Well, while we're on this drawing, we'll talk about some of the elements. One of the principal elements of the shapes that you'll find in a jet engine is a truncated cone.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So the truncated cone will appear in just about every section of the engine, from the front end to the aft end. But anyway, getting back to that process, the manufacturing engineers will submit a plan to the production. Then production will review the plan. The engineer will have tools, dies, fixtures, gauges ordered from suppliers or to be made internally, and then everything will come together with that particular part that they're designed to produce and inspect.
Okay.
So accuracy, the complexity of these parts is very, very, they are unique because you have the application of geometries such as a airfoil shape or something like that, that's kind of applied to a truncated cone or other parts, and then they're supposed to fit with precision. You cannot allow for any variation from accuracy, no variation whatsoever.
Right.
You have certain tolerances that you work within, right? Maybe 1, 2,000, sometimes maybe 20,000, but you have to stay within those tolerances, otherwise the part is no good.
Wow.
It could be either scrapped or you may have to rework it, which just adds cost and reduces your profits, right? The point is that when it comes to public safety, you have to follow due diligence,
Right.
And that is with the people you hire, from the engineers down to toolmakers, to machinists, to production employees. All of them are obligated to adhere to very tight standards.
This is an example of probably something that requires the utmost precision than probably anything on Earth, because you're building engines that are on planes that are carrying hundreds of people, right? So I assume, like, even building skyscrapers, you don't have to be as precise as you have to be when creating something like this, which contains, I'm sure, millions of very tiny parts and different types of materials that fit together that they create the entire thing.
Say when they ship a jet engine, say like a large Trent engine, Rolls-Royce, maybe ship to a customer, the paperwork that goes with it, all the certifications weighs more than the engine.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, so it's a
And your son works for Rolls-Royce, by the way. That's a little interesting aside. Your son is working at the aerospace division of Rolls-Royce.
yeah, he's
amazing.
working in metrology there. The reason I want to share this with you is because it does have an impact on the way somebody who is from this industry, or even any kind of manufacturing industry, the way they look at ancient Egyptian artifacts and how they interpret what they see. And I think it also has created a bit of a schism, between manufacturers and technophiles, those who are really into, they have some technical education, even though it's not identical to, say, another field. You will have certain experience in technology, maybe it's media or photography or electronics or things like that. And so your brain is wired a certain way. But you don't have the shop experience of actually going down into the shop and creating these artifacts.
Right.
And knowing what can change something to make it not workable. And there can be very, very slight changes that will, say, the geometry on a cone. It doesn't have to change very much for it to be scrapped.
Right.
So if you misinterpret the drawing, or something like that, and cut something out of print, then you scrap it.
At what point did you become aware of some of the artifacts and pyramids and everything in ancient Egypt?
That was in 1977.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was working as a tool and die maker, in Indianapolis. And I was in a bookstore, and I saw this book out by Peter Tompkins, and that's me there. Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, we didn't talk about this.
Oh, you want to talk about?
Yeah, let's talk about it. What is it?
I don't know. If I tell you about that, I may have to kill you.
It'll be worth it.
No, it won't. It's no big deal. But yeah, there's a story behind it.
Wait, you really can't tell a story?
Well, yeah, I guess I could.
So what is this plane, and where is it?
That is a F-117, and that is the stealth fighter.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
In the Desert Storm.
And which part of this plane did you build?
Well, I am not going to claim that I actually cut those parts that you see on that plane, but there was a period of time I was running a laser job shop in Indianapolis.
A laser job shop?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does that mean in English?
Well, we're using high-powered lasers to cut aircraft materials.
Okay.
Right. So I was working for a company called Reddick Engineering, and Reddick was a great guy. Right? I was encouraging him to get into lasers because I'd become fascinated with lasers. And he actually went to an auction and bought a Perkins Elmer helium neon laser with retro reflector and target for alignments and stuff like that. He comes, wheels it over to my bench, and he goes, "There you go, bloke. See what you can do with that."
Wow.
Right.
What do one of those lasers cost?
Well, I don't know what he paid for it, but it wasn't much because he was a cheap bastard.
Yeah, I got it on auction.
No, he was a good guy.
Yeah.
A cheap bastard.
Some of the best guys are cheap bastards.
Aren't you though?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, but one day a guy comes in with these panels, right? And he wanted me to set them up in the laser and cut these rectangular holes in them.
Okay.
But they were on compound angles. And it was an array of them, right, in a square.
Yeah.
So I set them up, programmed the laser, and cut those little squares. And then I go to, I see the F-117, and I'm looking at the air intake on the front. And it's like, those look remarkably like those panels.
Wow.
I cut. And the engineer that brought them in, I was like, hey, what? I was always very curious about where this stuff went, you know,
Yeah.
what it was used for, what the application was. What are these for? What are these for? And he goes, can't tell you.
Classified.
Just cut it.
Just cut it.
Actually, you're not cutting, you're burning. The laser burns it, you just cut it.
Wow.
Right, so anyway, that's that story.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so the
So this is the first book that you came across about the pyramids in Egypt.
yeah, that was 1970.
That cover is interesting looking. You see all the
Yeah.
dirt that's coming up the side of the pyramids? All the sand or whatever it is?
That is, an artist impression of it. I don't think it's accurate, but it is true that the pyramids, they had a lot of sand and also rubble, because the pyramids were pretty much destroyed. Most of the casing stones that had been shaken off in history. You know. The official theory is that they were used to build the mosques and minarets of Cairo, and they were using the whole Giza Plateau as a quarry. And there's signs of that too. That they were actually doing some quarrying up there. You see evidence of Roman quarry marks, particularly to the south of the second pyramid,
Okay.
Khafre's pyramid.
Okay.
And you'll find a lot of granite blocks. Some of them still in situ up against the pyramid, others laying out in the field to the south, and they will have these these slots or grooves cut into them, where they try to wedge, cut them into pieces, and succeed in some cases.
Wow.
Yeah, and the interesting thing there is that
You're talking about the actual, the dynastic Egyptians were doing that.
I don't think it was the dynastic Egyptians.
Okay.
I think it was the Romans.
Oh, the Romans. Okay.
Right, because in other parts of the world you'll see the same kind of technique that they use for quarrying.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, got it.
And then the question is, if the dynastic Egyptians built the pyramids, right, why would they proceed to tear them apart?
How'd they tear them apart?
Well, you say, well, did the dynastic Egyptians create those quarry marks? But they were actually stripping the granite away from the pyramid. And so it really doesn't make sense to build a pyramid and put all, go to the trouble of putting all that beautiful granite against it, and then, taking a hammer and chisel.
Like the casing stones and stuff like that.
Right.
They were stripping it away. And,
Right. So I think they,
Who was the first person to come up with the idea that the dynastic Egyptians were responsible for the pyramids?
who was the first person?
Or the first group, where did that come from?
Well, that has been in the official literature for a long time.
Didn't you say that it was written by Europeans, that history?
Most of the Egyptian history was written by earlier Egyptologists, which were Europeans. So in England, William Flinders Petrie was considered to be England's or Britain's first Egyptologist. August Mariette, French in France. And so, the Europeans were very active in studying Egyptian artifacts and also, taking a few home with them.
Yeah.
A lot of them home with them. So they, as far as the, assigning the time period for the building of the pyramids, because the pyramids were assigned to a particular king in a period of time, they placed them in the fourth dynasty.
The fourth dynasty.
Right. So it's like 2400 BC something.
And when did you first go to Egypt?
86.
86.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. 86. Yeah, that was it was different in '86. It was very chaotic, and it was a bit of a culture shock for me. But the interesting thing was, I was really nervous because I'd already been writing, about my theory on the Great Pyramid, which occurred to me in 1977. And so when I actually came face to face with the pyramids, which anybody who writes about pyramids must visit it eventually.
Yeah.
Right.
You'd think.
Sooner rather than later. I was much later than I had hoped. That's the way things work.
So I didn't know. So you started writing about this before you actually visited Egypt.
I did, yeah.
What prompted you to begin writing about it, and,
Well-
and where were you getting your information from?
Well, that's the thing. See, I was, and that really heavily influenced my mind because I was looking at the pyramid and the schematics of the pyramid as an engineered product that had the precision of a machine.
It's football season, baby, and you know what time it is. Time to gamble all that hard-earned money on some sports. As a bettor, you demand perfection, and that's where MyBookie delivers. NFL, college football, and a brand new cash out system. Keep bigger pay. Let you bet your deposit amount once at Bookie.
Which included kind of an evolution.
Again, that's promo code DJP to claim your cash deposit bonus. You can bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie.
It was a kind of an evolution of that thinking, gathering all the information from Tompkins' book, which included the pyramids and temples of Giza and what it was contained in there, that I became convinced that the effort for building the Great Pyramid, it seemed to me that the culture that built it was much more advanced in terms of their technical manufacturing capabilities and than what we have been taught. So that is clearly evident, and I think that has been supported by most engineers and technicians who have been over there and actually started to study them with that thought in mind.
Were you the first person to come up with the theory that the pyramid was a power plant?
Guilty. Let me back up a little bit. There was a general period of time in the 70s where there was a lot of interest in something that they call pyramid power. In that the pyramids had, just by the shape of the pyramid, it had this kind of energetic value. So there was a lot of talk about that. There was a book written by Patrick Flanagan back in the 70s called Pyramid Power. There were other books written that referred to the Great Pyramid with talking about pyramid power. But it was a mystical kind of power rather than a practical.
Mystical, how so?
Something that was not quantified in physical terms or three-dimensional terms.
Not measured.
Not measured. It's more like something that we didn't quite understand, not quantified.
And was that based on like people standing in the pyramids and
It's based on a lot of that kind of information, or those experiences. It was more an experiential kind of an experiential experience. Scratch that.
Right.
No, it was more an observation. And it was
Subjective.
Subjective in a lot of ways. Some of it was, they tried to measure it, but they were measuring effects rather than identifying what kind of energy it was.
Okay.
The sharpened razor blade experiment was very popular back then, where the pyramid was said to, if you put a razor blade inside a pyramid shape, then the blade would stay sharper longer.
What?
Yeah. So it had a lot of different values.
Is that true? Does the razor blade stay sharper longer to keep it inside the pyramid?
I tried that, and I did it. I said, well, I'm going to try it. So I used a razor blade for a little longer than I thought. But then I had the thought in my mind was that doing those kind of experiments, those are already done. What was needed was a complete kind of reverse engineering of the structure to determine and find answers for every single part of it.
Right.
What was originally designed into it, what was introduced afterwards that was not a part of the design, but the operation of the pyramid, what effects that may have had in certain areas. And so there was quite a lot of information that I had to go through to find answers for. A lot of mystery.
Can you do in your book? You do a beautiful job of explaining reverse engineering. Can you give me a rundown on how you reverse engineer something?
Well, it's very simple. It's like if somebody comes to you with say you're a manufacturer, somebody comes to you with a product that already exists. They don't have any drawings. They don't have any specifications on it at all, and they say, I want you to make this. I want you to make this exactly like this. And if you do that, then it's going to function the way I think it will. Okay, so you make it identical to the original. What do? You take the piece, you take it to the lab, you measure every single part of it, how many parts are actually in it, and then you determine a process on how you would reproduce it, right?
Okay.
And then you reproduce it, and then you compare it to the original and say, okay, does this look like the original? Is it similar to it?
Is it made the same?
Measure to measure.
Measured it.
Yeah, it's not just a matter of looking at it and saying, yeah, that's close.
Okay.
It's like, no, you've got to measure it, and you've got to be very exact.
Okay.
Now, the other part to reverse engineering is to try and determine what goes on inside an engine or inside a device, a machine, a complex machine, any complex machine, how it functions based on its output when you can't see what's inside, right?
Uh-huh.
So the first thing you've got to do is open it up, and then you try and determine through examining every single component inside it how it functions. Manufacturers do that all the time.
So it's the reverse effect of engineering something, which is when you're engineering something, you say, hey, I want something that achieves this. I want something that performs this task. And that's when you're engineering. You say, okay, how do we perform this task? We put this thing together, we build the parts that we think are going to do this, and then measure everything, and then
Measurement, design, and function.
measurement, design, and function. Right.
So you measure, you analyze the design, you take measurements,
And you figure out the function.
determine what the function is.
And engineering is the opposite.
So
Engineering is function.
you have a particular function that you want a device to perform, and so
Right.
then you do the design, and then you build the product
Right.
using the measurements.
Right. When you started writing about the pyramids, and you were sort of like seeing sort of diagrams in the 70s had already been done, and all of the chambers that are known about today had already been discovered, and you sort of knew what it looked like.
Yeah.
And you just assumed that, there's no way something this precise with these weird shafts and compartments and voids was built for a tomb. You thought intuitively that it looked like something that had a function.
I did, yeah. Let me see if I can bring up cross section of the Great Pyramid. So this is an image out of my book, and the different features on the inside is what really caught my attention.
Okay.
We'll start with the downward shaft, which is this particular shaft right here. Sorry. So this shaft right here, over the constructed portion of it, from the opening here down to the bedrock, was straight within the thickness of a thumbnail. That is 20 thousandths of an inch. Okay. The passageway, that's called the descending passage. The passageway is around 40 inches square. I think it's around 40 inches square. Mm-hmm. And it goes down 350 feet to this bedrock chamber. The entire length from the outside of 350 foot long is only out 1/4 of an inch, and that is also the excavated portion.
40 inches wide. I assume people haven't been down there, right?
I've been down there.
How do you get down there?
I won't get down there today, obviously, but
You go 300 feet down a 40-inch tunnel?
yeah.
People still do this?
People do that. Yeah, I mean,
Is it all lit up and stuff for people to is it?
yeah, there are lights. There are lights along there. And, you get down into the subterranean chamber, and some people have even gone into this shaft right here. That's cut even smaller than the 40 inches. There was a story about that in my book. On a tour that I co-hosted in 2018, there was a geologist and an engineer, actually, two engineers. One, Andy Leskowitz, he went down to the end of that shaft.
How wide is that little shaft on the end of that
It's
chamber?
very small. I mean, I wouldn't fit in. You might. I would, when I was a lot younger, I would have gladly gone down there. But
So
it's late now.
this cross section of the pyramid, this was available in the 70s. Everyone knew about all of these chambers and these shafts were all known then.
All except for I.
I is the recent one which was found by the Scan Pyramids Project.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So the big void that was discovered in 2017.
Okay. Okay. So you saw this, and what was the first thing that went through your head?
It was really weird. It was very mysterious because I'm like, what's going on here? I'm like, there's something going on here, and I didn't know what it was. I was like, but it's just so mysterious. And I just sat down and I started to draw these three-dimensional drawings of the different chambers, right? And then just looking at it, and trying to figure out what each of those chambers was used for became my passion. But the thing that struck me the most is the incongruity of the shafts, the small shafts. There's a story behind those that is quite exciting, really. But they're really important to the function of the machine. So yeah, all of that struck me immediately with the precision, just the angles, the different shapes. It was all very machine-like to me. And I think, when it comes to saying that the pyramid was a machine to produce energy, then yeah, I was probably the first to actually put that out.
What type of machine do you believe that this pyramid is, and how does it work?
In my first book, it's called the Giza Power Plant, as you know. And
Yes.
okay, so the Giza Power Plant described the Great Pyramid. I described it as a coupled oscillator, in that it was connected to the Earth. Its proportions were an integer to the Earth, and it was tuned harmonically to the vibrations of the Earth. That was what I proposed. And as such, it reacted to the Earth's pulse, or the Earth's vibrations. And through that, they were able to stimulate electron flow in the central granite chamber and produce microwave energy. So basically, I described it as a maser, but it was a
Maser.
solid-state maser.
A solid-state electron harvester.
Well, that's what ultimately I call it. Yeah, it was an electron harvester. And so that was in my first book. I didn't call it electron harvester.
Oh, that was in the
Definitely.
book. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I realize that, a lot of people will look at the word power plant, and the vision that comes to their mind is like smokestacks,
Right.
long trains of coal snaking through the countryside to these power plants. And so, kind of, and then of course, power plant and nuclear power plant, coal power plants, and stuff like that.
Right.
So that's generally associated with boiling water, creating steam, pushing turbines, and drawing the electrons off the generators. But this was kind of like a different concept in terms of creating energy or drawing energy from the Earth directly without burning fossil fuels or smashing atoms.
So underneath, in the cover of the Giza power plant, you have the pyramid sitting in the desert, and then underneath that, you have like it looks like lava underneath, and then like the crust of the Earth. So I guess you're describing the seismic activity that's happening inside of the Earth, creating vibrations that are resonating with all the rocks in the pyramid.
Yeah, that cover was created by my publisher, their artist, and basically it does represent what you just said.
Okay.
As far as strict accuracy to engineering drawings, you don't see that there, but it loosely gives you an idea.
Okay.
Right. It represents the pyramid, energy coming out of the pyramid, its connection to the Earth, and energy going on inside the Earth that is tapping into.
So you theorized that the pyramids were harvesting energy and generating energy to power whatever civilization created them.
Yeah.
And how do they get power from the pyramids?
How do they get it?
How do they use it?
How do they use it?
Yeah.
That is a good question. It's a question I get asked a lot. The problem that we have is when you look at the pyramids, so you go to Egypt and you walk around the pyramids and the temples, you look at the skeleton of a civilization. Obviously, there's so much that's missing that has disappeared over time.
Right.
We don't know where. And so when you ask the question, well, what were they powering? We don't find any microwave ovens out in the desert, but and you probably won't. The only thing that really survived from that period of time was the rocks. The rocks, yeah. Right. So and some other materials, but the rocks basically survived. And it's a matter of then again, it's like, okay, so what we're left with is the rocks. So what do? We take measurements. We look at the design. We analyze the effects of certain spaces, like the King's Chamber, the effects of that chamber, with the acoustic effects of it, the acoustic effects of the Grand Gallery. So there's a lot that we can study to try and come up with some answers as to how it functioned, what it did. And it's an evolving. I would call it like I would say that it's a kind of like an international brainstorming session. Right. So I mean, if you ask me what my whole role is in this thing, I would say I'm a mechanic that comes across an engine in the desert, and I'm trying to figure out what the engine does. Right. And so in order to figure it out, I need a lot of help. I need the assistance of experts in different fields: physicists, electrical engineers, acoustic engineers, geologists, materials engineers. All of those people have input. And so that's what I did. I talked to civil engineers, I talked to electrical engineers, I talked to mechanical engineers as I was developing the theory.
Okay. And when you first traveled to Egypt and went inside the pyramid, what did you discover from your personal experience being there, going inside the chambers? Did that have any sort of effect? I'm sure it did on some of the writing you did previous to that.
Found it. Just the experience of being there is just mind-blowing. Whether you're writing about it or just a general. Tourists. I mean, I've seen people really affected tremendously just by going into Great Pyramid. But as far as how did it affect my perception or my ideas or what the Great Pyramid was, I was worried. I was extremely worried that it would when I went there. And I was on my way to Egypt and I'm thinking, well, I'm done. What have you done now? You're going to Egypt and what if it's all not as you read? It's something totally different, and you're just going to leave thinking, okay, well, I just wasted 6 years of my life or whatever.
Right.
So, yeah, I was concerned about that, and that actually kept me away from the Great Pyramid. I didn't go into the Great Pyramid for 3 days was like I was, eyeing it where it was just, and like, yeah, didn't want to go up there.
You're afraid. You were afraid that might kill your dream.
Yeah, there was a bit of nervousness. There was also a lot of, I don't know, just acclimatizing to the culture there was kind of difficult back in '86. It's a lot easier these days. So, but anyway, the third day I was there. Fourth day I went up and made to go in, and went in, did a few checks, and it was like, oh, it's fine. And the, it just the different dimensions that it provides you. It's not just a a clinical review of books, many different books that I accessed over the years when I was studying it. It wasn't just a clinical analysis at that point. It became a living thing. It was kind of like a totally different thing.
It's one thing to read a story, it's another thing to live it.
Right. It's like, yeah, okay, so I'm looking at lines on paper, and now I'm inside those lines.
Right.
And then after that, I went outside and pondered on the whole thing, and started to wander around the plateau. But that's when I started to look. At a lot of the casing stones and the stones on the south of the Khafre's pyramid, the second pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm walking around there, and I'm looking at these what I consider to be really, really sharp and flat, sharp angles, sharp corners, very well cut stone with flat surfaces, and then some other unusual shaped stones that looked like they were extremely precise. But this was in '86, and I didn't have any tools or instruments with me to see if indeed what I was looking at was actually precise.
Right.
You can't really tell by looking at a photograph, just how, or looking at it with your eyes, just exactly how precise it is. You have to measure it.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So that's what when I left, I had that in mind. But next time I go, I need to take some instruments with me and check things out a little closer.
And how long did it take for you went back?
1995.
Oh wow. Okay.
It was you remember in 1993, Rudolf Gantenbrink did the exploration of the southern shaft in the Queen's Chamber.
Okay. Who was Rudolf Gantenbrink?
Gantenbrink was a German robotics engineer, and he was commissioned by the German mission in Cairo to clean out the shafts because they wanted to install some ventilation in them to protect the monument. So he was contracted to go to Egypt. He designed and built a robot to explore the shafts, and particularly it was the King's Chamber that he was focused on, was actually clearing it out and then installing fans.
Okay. Do you have any images of this?
Okay, so if we look at this one right here.
Okay.
Okay, what you see here is this is the southern shaft opening, which has particular significance to the theory, the microwave theory.
Okay.
This is an opening in the south wall, and it's directly opposite an opening in the north wall. It's right here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this opening here has dimensions of 8.4 by 4.8 inches.
Oh wow.
So generally the guidelines for creating a waveguide are the height is about half the width of the length. So
What is a waveguide?
a waveguide carries microwaves,
And what is that used for today commercially?
communication for the most part.
Like, for example, what?
Oh, just about everything that we get. I mean, you got these microwave towers. Try and pull up a microwave horn antenna on the internet.
Okay.
So you have those. They're all different shapes and sizes. There's obviously I don't work in the microwave industry.
So where's the waveguide here?
Well, that's a horn antenna with a waveguide, right? And there are some where you have curvatures on the interior surface. But you see the waveguide itself, the horn, receives a broader signal and then narrows it down to the waveguide and transmits it through the waveguide.
Okay. All right. So that's what we're looking at when we're seeing those little shafts. The dimensions of those are.
If you believe what I'm telling you.
Okay. All right. I believe it, man. I believe you.
So when I saw that, it was like, okay, that looks like a horn antenna, right? And that's in the south wall of the King's Chamber. Directly opposite is a shaft where the width is almost twice the dimension of the height. So you do have that rectangular kind of opening. It's 4.8 high and 8.4 inches.
Okay.
So essentially, the width has to be related to the wavelength of the atoms that are used to create the microwave signal.
Okay.
Okay. And the wavelength of hydrogen is 21 centimeters, or 8.309 inches. So it's almost 8.4 inches.
Close.
So if you had some kind of a liner in there, maybe gold-plated liner, then you would have
So if these things could have been plated or coated on the surface, it would be a little smaller.
Right, yeah, it would be just a little smaller.
So it's the perfect dimensions for a waveguide for hydrogen.
It's very, very close. Well, I mean, just as it is, it's close.
Okay.
But they could be lined. Now, of course, critics will say, well, there's been nothing found in the archaeological record that would indicate that those things even ever existed. And that's maybe true, except for one plate that was found by Herring and Petrie on the south side of the Great Pyramid near the shaft, and that is an iron plate. And on one surface of this iron plate